This is day after tomorrow is Christmas, the day that we celebrate and remember that Jesus was incarnate, is the theological word. It means that he took on the form and flesh and appearance of a man. And when I say appearance, I mean that he looked like us, but I don't mean that it was only looks, like he actually was fully human. And to this day is still fully human, while at the same time being fully God. And it's a mystery for the ages. And so I want to just reflect on that a little bit. I'm going to start in maybe an odd place, but be patient. And also, if you expected not to have to think too much, you might get disappointed. All right, open to I don't have verses on the slides. I want us to just see it in our Bibles. Open to Genesis 6. I want to show you something in Genesis 8, but first I got to set it up in Genesis 6. I'm going to verse 5. Genesis 6, verse 5. Everybody there? You've opened or turned on your Bible? Yes? Everybody there? Genesis 5? Okay.
Yes, I'm there.
Excellent. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth. The word man there is humankind, humanity. And it grieved him to his heart. Does it say that he was mad? No, right? It says he was grieved to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and the birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. There's that hope. Somebody found favor. So Genesis chapter 6 and 7 goes on, and 8 goes on to talk about the flood, right? And it's talked about this kind of undoing of creation. If you pay attention to the things that Genesis 1 has, and then the things that are described here as happening when the flood came, it's like this implosion of the created order, right? The waters above the earth and the waters below the earth collapse, erase dry land, all this stuff. But look at verse at chapter 8, verse 20. Why did the Lord blot out man from? What does it say? So he blotted out man for what reason? He was grieved, yeah. And verse 5, because the wickedness of man was great. That's what grieved him. And then he decided, okay, I'm sorry I ever did this. Chapter 8, verse 20, this is at the end of this whole flood narrative, and Noah finds dry land, the ark rests there, and he goes and makes an altar to God. And verse 21, he makes an altar and he offers a sacrifice there. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, so now the Lord is pleased, right? Before he was grieved, now he's pleased. And he says, I will never again curse the ground because of man. And then here's the thing I want you to notice. the next phrase, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I strike again down every living creature as I have done. And he goes on to promise that as long as the earth remains, you're going to just have regular seasons, day, night, rain, sun, winter, harvest, all the regular, everything's going to just continue. Does that strike you as weird to you? God said, man is just evil from his youth. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to never destroy him again. Does that sound like a non sequitur? Like a what? Like you took a left turn? Like is that what we're expecting him to say based on Genesis 6, where he said, man is just evil and he's grieved, and then he decides, to destroy the world. Now he's like, man is just, there's just no helping that boy. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to never do that again. Am I the only one that this is striking as a strange, kind of a, does it make sense? One other person agrees with me. Yeah, I mean he was pleased, but then he says nothing's changed. Nothing has changed from before to after. He says, man is just evil. I just know that this is how he is. Nothing's changed in the heart of man. But God said, I'm not going to do that again. Why? The answer to that is something to meditate on. I mean, the answer is he loves us, but you get that from more than just this passage. Put it together with other passages. He loves us. He's committed to rescuing us. And so he says, I'm not going to destroy because I'm committed to rescue. So why am I bringing this up? Well, right now, and at Easter, there's certain times of the year where we go back and just remember the story of God's rescue. And I want you to know that the Old Testament and the New Testament are not a rule book. That's not what God gave us. He didn't give us a rule book. And I think there's something profound. I think God knows what we're like as humans. Go figure. And I think that if God just gave you a rule book and he said, here, just follow these rules, would you do it? But that's what we want the Old Testament to be, just a rule book. There's a lot of laws in the Pentateuch, 613 of them. But they serve the story. The story is not about the laws. That's why they're not all in one block. They're interspersed. There's some narrative, there's some laws, there's some narrative, there's some laws, because they have a purpose in the story. Yes, there are things that we should covenant agreements that God is forming with Israel, saying we're going to be in covenant, in partnership, and this is what you should do and shouldn't do. But what God gave us isn't a rule book, it's a story, a narrative. And that's what I want you the first thing I want you to think about is just that there's something about how we function that God knows that a story is going to communicate his purposes from one generation to the next, not a rule book. The story. And this isn't unique to the Bible. I mean, think of all the myths of the stories we tell ourselves as humans throughout the millennia, right? go back to the foundation stories of Babylon with the god Marduk, or Zeus, how he defeated the Titans and set up his, that's kind of like the story that the Greek people told themselves about. This is who we are as a people. This is our, all this stuff, right? And do we still have that nowadays? You betcha. It's just it's more modern, and so it's a little more hidden. Think about Washington and the cherry tree. It's stories we tell ourselves about how we came to be as a nation and our leaders, and so that we, right? And lately there's been a big fad of going back and re-examining those stories. But my point is, the stories had this purpose of talking about our identity, and every system of thinking has that with it, right? Has some kind of, here's the story of who we are as a people, here's the story of where we're at, where we're going, what's the problem in the world, how is there a solution or not. Every whether you're atheist, whether you're any religion, you have to answer those questions some way, and you have a story, a framework that you put that together in. And I think it's not a coincidence that like nearly 50% of the Bible is stories. And unfortunately, we've kind of dumbed them down to just kids' stories and made them moral lessons and moved on. When really the Old and New Testament are very sophisticated on all these levels. So the Bible's not a rule book, and it's not just a collection of the Old Testament. It's not just a collection of prophecies that talk about Jesus is coming. Right? It all there's a story, and so you might think, oh yeah, I'm tired of always hearing this or retelling this or whatever. At times you might think that. I know there's been times where I've thought, oh, this just seems like old ground that I'm just rehashing. But one, the Bible is made so that, how many of you have read the entire Bible, and then, or you've read this chapter or that book or whatever, and then sometime later you're reading it again, you go, man, I never noticed that. All the time, me too. Because it's God's Spirit breathing life into it, and it's also intentionally designed by the folks that wrote this under inspiration from God to do that, to be something that as you just think about it day after day and year after year throughout your life, there's always more to discover. And it comes in the form of a story. There's a ton of poetry in there and stuff too, and it's all kind of commenting on the story. But it's not rule books. It's not this is what you should do or should. There's a little bit of that kind of, like in Paul's letters where he's saying do this or do that or don't do this, do that. In some of the other New Testament letters to different churches. But they're getting all that from reading their Old Testament, which is the only Bible they had. They're getting all that from that, right? And from their encounters with the risen Jesus. So the purpose of the Bible is to tell the story. Three things: to tell the story of how God has rescued and formed a people. Right? Think, for example, God bringing them out from Egypt, right? That's not the only example of that, but I'm citing, right? It's to invite these rescued people into a covenant partnership with Him so that they can be His representatives to the rest of the world. And thirdly, and this might be uncomfortable, but it's there. It's to accuse those covenant partners when they've failed or rebelled, but also to offer hope for the future of God's people and of the world. Think of all the prophets. Think of some of the things that are in those New Testament epistles where Paul has some strong words for these churches that are messing up. And he's warning them strongly. And so, it does all this through a story. So I just want to briefly just talk about some of that story, because this is 2 days to Christmas, and this is part of what we do at this time, is just think about, hey, let's go back to just remember our roots, where God brought us from, what's going on in the world, just the big picture, because it's so easy to get lost, isn't it, in the day-to-day struggles, the day-to-day interactions with other people, with systems of this world. Am I the only one that sometimes gets lost in all that? Okay, I see a couple people shaking their heads, so I'm not the only one. All right. Yeah, so God from the very beginning, in Genesis, when the humans took of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they ate it from that fruit, God shows up. He has a reckoning with them. He doesn't curse the humans ever. He curses the snake. He curses the ground, some other things, but not the people. And then Genesis 3:15 is that first hint. It's the poem about the snake crusher, where he says, I'm going to put to the woman, I'm going to put enmity between, he says to the snake, I'm going to put enmity between your seed and the seed of the woman. There's going to come one that's going to crush your head, and you'll bite his heel. And so there we go. That launches the story. Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 tell you the whole plot conflict of the whole Bible. Right? Humans have failed, have rebelled, and God has promised to rescue them somehow. And so there we go. We're going through, we've already talked about Noah. Noah shows up as kind of like the first verse in chapter 9 is that God bless after he does the sacrifice, and God says, I'm never going to do this again and stuff. He blesses Noah, and he says, be fruitful and multiply. It's the same blessing from Genesis 1 again. Noah's the new Adam. Only he has a problem too. Doesn't work. And then there's this spiral that culminates in Babylon. And then God scatters the nations and just focuses in on one man, Abraham. And he gives him this promise for no reason. Like, it doesn't say that he found that Abraham found favor in his eyes or anything like that. He just picked a guy for whatever reason. No reasons that were given, I guess is what I should say. And he says, hey, I'm going to bless you. He says all this stuff, just as Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And he says, and you, all the people of all the nations of the world will be blessed. And this begins this pattern of God just doubling down and narrowing down who he's selecting, right? Abraham has 2 kids, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael's not it, it's Isaac. Isaac has 2, Jacob and Esau. It's not Esau, it's Jacob. Jacob has 12 kids, and if you read Genesis 49, when Jacob is blessing each of his kids, he says of Judah, you're going to be the one that's going to have the dominion and the scepter and reign. So God selects Judah. Judah, read Genesis, he's not a nice fellow. They did some weird things. Which if you've just familiar with the kid story version of it, you don't know until you read the full passage. This is not because Judah was like some awesome guy. Abraham, most of the time, they're all a mixed bag. They do some great things, but most of the time, not so great. And then you go off into Judges. Sorry, I skipped the Egypt. God selects Moses. God makes a covenant with them, sends them into the promised land, and it's the book of Judges ends with them just looking no better. Read the last few chapters of Judges, then read the chapters about Sodom and Gomorrah. It's no better, no better. And there you go. People, and then they want a king. They pick Saul. Terrible choice. And God says, I'm going to pick somebody. And he picks David. And then David is this God, by God's description, this man after God's own heart. And then in 2 Samuel 6, David wants to build a temple for God, a house, right? House can be a building, like a temple. It can also be a like household, right? Same word. And David says, I want to build you a house. And God says, no, I'm going to build you a house. He says, thanks, but no thanks. He says, well, you can. Your son can. But here's the deal. I'm going to build you a house. And he wasn't talking about a building. And he makes this promise that somebody from the line of David is going to be the one that has this everlasting kingdom. And then off we go, looking at the line of David, Solomon, Rehoboam, all these guys. Some of them start out okay. Some of them, never really make it to okay. Just terrible human beings. And this long line of until in the end they get exiled. And then the prophets come and comment on all of this, right? All this storyline you've read through 2 Kings, and now you're reading the prophets, and they're just talking about all this stuff, and they start seeing in Hebrews, I think it's in Hebrews, where it talks about how they were the Spirit of God in them was looking for who was going to be the Christ, and so they start prophesying about that. And starting with like Isaiah, the what are called the suffering servant poems or songs, Isaiah 42 through 53. There's 4 kind of chunks of poems there where he's filling out this portrait of this figure who's going to be like, he's called Israel at one point, he's called a servant at another point. He's talked about how he's going to reign, but then later it's just how he's going to suffer. And then it just kind of mainly ends with that. And yeah, throughout the Bible, we've talked before about Moses in Deuteronomy, his farewell speech. He knows they're going to blow it. They're going to go into the promised land and they're going to blow it. And he tells them, okay, so when you blow it, here's what you need to do. Like, he tells them straight up. But he also speaks this word about one day God is going to circumcise your hearts, right? And he uses this metaphor of God is going to take away something from your heart that now helps you obey him, now that that's gone. And Jeremiah picks that up and talks about God writing his law on our hearts. And he says, nobody's going to talk to each other and say, hey, Mike, you should follow the Lord. Or Avery's not going to say, hey, Nate, you should follow the Lord. Because everybody is going to just follow him automatically. That's pretty different. And Ezekiel picks that up as well, but the heart of stone turned into a heart of flesh. And so I'm just hitting a few things, but that's the story at a macro level. All these ups and downs, but always this speaking of somebody's coming, an anointed one. I'll end the Old Testament comment with Daniel. Daniel has this weird dream. He had several weird dreams, but he has a really weird dream in Daniel 7 about these beasts coming up out of the sea, and they're just weird looking too. Like one of them's a bear with 3 ribs in his mouth, and one of them has, the skin of this part of an animal and the head of that part of an animal. And they're just weird. But they represent, the dream gets explained to him that they represent human kingdoms. And then he sees this vision of thrones, plural. And then he sees that, and I'll just read this to you. There's these thrones, right? And God's sitting on one of the thrones. There's this figure who's blazing light and all this stuff. Daniel 7:13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. Son of man, or like the son of phrase in the Old Testament, is used to talk about a member of that class. Like is Saul among the prophets? Is he one of the son of the prophets? Right? It just means, is he a prophet? Right? It's somebody, a member of that class. So this is just saying somebody who's human, a son of man, a human figure. There came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, in his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. And of all the things that Jesus called himself, it was that. It was the Son of Man. And everyone knew when he said to the high priest, from now, right before his crucifixion, when he said, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Majesty. He's referring to that. That's why instantly they tore their robes. They knew what he was saying. He was saying, I am that human figure that's going to go up to the clouds and take dominion. Anyway, some of my favorite, well, let me say this first. So, Old Testament, God's always planned, I've talked about this when I talked about the image of God, he's always planned to rule the world through humans. No plan B. That's plan A, period. And so, and like I said earlier, that's the plot conflict when the humans blow it. How's he going to do it? But he even his rescue plan was working through humans. He didn't just show up and say, okay, I'm going to, just make everything right. I'm going to die, or I'm going to whatever. No, he chooses Abraham. He chooses Isaac. He chooses Jacob. On down the line, till eventually he's born in a stable as a baby. He didn't show up fully grown, because he always intended to do it through humans. And since there was no perfect human to be found, he took it on himself to fulfill that covenant, so that then he could bring us into it. And so Galatians, I like this phrase, Galatians 4, verse 4, Paul says, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law. The fullness of time, God sent his Son. When everything was... I don't think that the Israelites saw it that way, probably, at the time. They're like, man, it's been 580, 90 years since we were even a kingdom that ruled ourselves. And we're still waiting. And it looks like there's no end in sight with these Romans around. But God said, now's the time. And so I just want to draw attention to that story, that Jesus became a human, was incarnate, became a flesh and blood human just like us, so that we could do what we couldn't do, right? It was his whole plan all along to be the true human, the faithful Israelite, the God's anointed one that just did everything right. And did everything the way God would do it, which is always serving. We talked earlier about love, always serving. Never lording it over anybody, never asking. When people called him things like the Christ or the Son of God, I mean, he didn't say, no, I'm not. But he didn't say, tell me more, keep it coming. He was usually like, okay, keep this under wraps, fellas. I need to make it to Jerusalem. I don't need to die early. And the fullness of time, Jesus was born in a stable to a young lady, probably in her teens. First time, probably pretty scary. Even with all the assurances of angels, I'm not sure if that makes it more or less scary. You can think about it, see how you would feel. And his birth, who's the first to see him? Not kings, not powerful, influential rulers. It's smelly shepherds, women who at the time were somewhat second-class citizens. I'm sure Mary had some midwife help. It wasn't just all by herself in a stable. And that's who he revealed himself to first. That's who first saw his face. And he was just motivated by love and wanting to rescue us, wanting to be with us, wanting to rule the world through us and in us. And he just keeps doubling down. And every time we messed up, he just doubled down. He held humanity more closely. That's the story of the Old Testament and the New Testament. 1 Corinthians, I'll end with this. 1 Corinthians 10:11. Paul's talking about some of those old stories. And he says, these things happened to them. He's talking about the Israelites who never entered the promised land. These things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come. The end of the ages has come. And that's the time period we're living in. Everything changed when he was born, and when he died, and when he rose again. And we celebrate and remember this story. The good news is good news about a king that came and is now reigning. It's not good advice about what to do. It's an announcement. Good news. That's why the angel said, great tidings, good tidings of great joy. So, don't get tired of thinking and meditating on these stories and these poems, and both Old Testament and New Testament. I know it's like sometimes it can be a bear to tackle some of those, more often than not in some cases. But it's the story of how God rescued his people and formed them into a people, and how he wants to partner with us so we can be representatives to the rest of the world, and how we have a hope for us in the future and for this entire world to be rescued. Amen?